All right, welcome back, everyone. I get the honor and privilege of moderating our last panel of the day. This is a panel I'm really excited about. It's called "The Future of Law Firms in the Age of Generative AI: Reimagining the Law Firm Value Proposition." I want to get started because I know we've got a ton of content to cover. If you are familiar with the panelists here in front of you, you can tell why we've got a lot to cover. So let's go around the horn here. Let's go Jay, Jordan, Jen, and introduce yourself briefly, and then let's launch right into it. Jay, you want to kick us off here?
Sure, thrilled to be here. My name is Jay. I'm Jay like the letter. I'm like you don't remember. I'm the executive director of Six Parsecs. It is a Star Wars reference. We're an insights and advisory firm for the legal vertical, and we cover three topics: changing nature of legal buy, so how clients buy and consume services differently. How legal teams discharge the work differently, which gets us into practice innovation, and then how legal tech is enabling all of this change in the legal vertical.
I'm Jordan Furlong. I am a legal sector analyst, speaker, consultant, writer, commentator, choose your noun. I kind of like them all. I am based in Ottawa, Canada.
Hi, I'm Jen Leonard. I'm CEO of Creative Lawyers, a consulting firm that works with law firms, corporate legal departments, and law schools to think about all the changes happening around us and how we modernize legal practice and legal education.
Excellent. Thank you all for the introduction. So, Jay, we're going to start with you. I'm going to keep this question kind of intentionally broad because I know there's a lot to say about this. So, obviously, in the kind of title and description of this panel, we're talking about redefining the law firm value proposition, and that gives rise to a lot of concepts, right? Gives rise to the concept of the law firm leverage model, partners and associates. It gives rise to the Cravath model that we've already talked about in this conference of maybe summer associates and the partner track, et cetera. What's your take on how generative AI generally, new tech, is going to affect all of these concepts?
Sure. I think it is worth actually going back to the origin. I think the Cravath model is really instructive to think about. Not just how it shapes the market today, but what it was intended to do in the first place. So if you really think about what the Cravath model was designed to do when Paul Cravath dreamed it up, and instead of only looking at I think the talent model and the compensation and what the firm does to kind of perpetuate itself, and instead think about the client needs that it was designed to solve, then we get some ideas about how we started thinking about outside counsel in the first place. And I think that model was designed to do one specific thing with a clear set of attributes. So I think that if you think about deep benches of highly pedigreed lawyers along practice specialties, I think organized into like ad hoc tactical teams, right? And you think about what those kinds of really, really specialized lawyers would be great at doing. It's really high consequence work that probably occurs unpredictably, and then of great consequence to the company, right? And then so if we distill that down, I think one thing we can take away from the Cravath model is that it solves a peak load problem. It solves high consequence problems. And that I think from that model sprang the idea of the trusted advisor to the top leaders of the company, right? And all of that means sky high rates. And I think the billable hour and lockstep compensation kind of sprang out of that later. The initial conceptualization of how it would all work really had to do with the client need. And then so maybe we focus on the wrong parts of the Cravath model when we look at the current firm value proposition, right? Because since then, we have stretched and strained this model to the point of breaking for about the last 60 years. And when you think about like the overall composition of the corporate legal wallet these days, a lot of the trouble and the pain and kind of the triggers for legal innovation do not occur in that high value tranche. Clients by and large are not complaining about how that is working. They're really complaining about what I would call the core, the tranche of run the business work. Yes, but that running the business has changed really drastically in the last 20, 30 years with the rise of digitalization, globalization. The pace of business has, quickened immensely. And then so the demands on the internal law department and the kind of work that they started sending out to an increasingly complex network of suppliers has created its own kind of complexity. And I would call that something different than the kind of legal complexity that Paul Cravath was trying to solve almost 100 years ago, right? I would call this scale complexity. I would call this human or organizational complexity. And then if we get back to generative AI and, all of the things that we might envision it doing to legal work and the way that legal teams actually collaborate within and across organizational boundaries, I think it's safe to say the century where all firms try to, build or adapt how they do business, how they do work on the Cravath model is over. So the Cravath century is over. It's time for a new vision of how we develop talent. How do we deploy that talent? What segment of the market and the corporate legal wallet are we targeting? What problem are we solving? I think these are the questions where we have to begin. And then so I think though in the near term, what generative AI does is it extends human capacity quite a bit. Human attention is scarce. AI attention is almost infinitely scalable. There are some economic issues with that, but I think that means we are past the peak load problem, right? It changes the way that we think about peak load. So that's one clear way that I think Gen AI kind of reshapes the board for how we think about the law firm value proposition. Specialized expertise, though, I think still remains a clear value proposition of the firm because the clients, corporate legal departments, just the economics don't make sense for them to maintain that variety of really deep expertise in-house, right? That just still doesn't make sense. So I think that's going to stay the same. Peak load's going to go away. And that's why I think leverage is going to be the first change that we see, because leverage is a clear feature that was designed to solve the peak load problem. So I think that's kind of my high level thoughts about it. There are many thoughts that kind of scaffold off of that, but would love to hear reactions.
Yeah, Jordan, Jay set the table really well there, right? There's obviously a lot of big themes there. There's leverage, there's peak load, there's infinite scalability of AI, right? She also set the table on the run the company versus bet the company distinction. A lot of very kind of juicy ideas there, but what's your take on the peak load problem? What's your take on, the proposition that may be overly simplistic that run the company work will be changed forever and totally disrupted and blah, 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 blah by AI, and bet the company work will remain sacrosanct and totally untouched? Obviously meant to be provocative, but what's your take on that?
Yeah, no, I think it's directionally that's largely true. I think it's probably incomplete. Agreeing with everything Jay says, and I, for one, will be more than happy to wave goodbye to the Cravath century, bon voyage. The thing that strikes me about we talk about run the company work, and the thing of it is that, yes, it is true. I think that technology in terms of automation and generative AI and mechanization and so forth, yes, that is going to consume a lot of it. A lot of it's already been consumed well before the Gen AI era arrived. I think if there's any particular distinction going forward about this, it's that this work is going to increasingly get consumed and be done on the client side. Like this is not going to jump the moat into law firms anymore. Like I think companies will be doing run the company work, which is, kind of where you think it should happen. Bet the company work, sure. Lawyers and law firms love that kind of stuff. They talk about it all the time. We're always chasing bet the company work. A couple of problems with that, to my mind. First is companies don't bet themselves every day. It's not really the kind of thing you should count on happening. And if that's kind of the foundation of your business, that's an issue. And then related to that, increasingly all the time, we have companies more and more sophisticated, forward looking, and they're kind of focused on, okay, how do we avoid, like, we don't want bet the company scenarios. Why would we want that? We want to evade them, avoid them, minimize them. And so again, if that's part of your business plan going forward, not sure it's a great idea. But the third piece of it to me is I think there's a third category of work which we haven't talked about much yet, and I think it's going to become a more significant part of the market going forward, and that's what you could call grow the company work. And that is something where I think clients tend to sit up a little bit and say, okay, now we're sort of talking about stuff that matters to me. When you are finding work that enhances the value and the growth of the company itself, the client, from their perspective. So this is where, as a lawyer or a law firm, you're saying, okay, can we help you spot opportunities, maybe by parsing through your data or doing like strategic analyses of your market position? Can we do risk assessments to find out where you're vulnerable? What can we do to help you, the client, move upstream, move upstream towards the place and the source of a lot of the problems that have traditionally come downstream towards us? So I would suggest to law firms and lawyers, look, I know this isn't your thing normally, your preference is to be reactive than proactive, but that is an opportunity, and that's a place of significant need and value, I think, opportunity from the client point of view.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Jordan. Well, Jen, first of all, obviously we've opened up a lot of themes. I'd love to hear your thoughts on anything that you'd like to talk about from what Jay and Jordan have set up. I want to introduce an additional theme because I think you're very, very well situated to talk about it. Obviously, the keynote was, if I'm to paraphrase, what is an attorney or a lawyer in the age of AI? What do they do? What work are they supposed to accomplish? What are they supposed to achieve? How do we score them? Right? You have a very rich background in legal academia and legal education. What's the new value prop of a legal education? And what kind of new lawyers should we be putting into the world while the sands are shifting from under us?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question, Anand. And I just want to float one question that I'd love to come back to and ask Jordan about in the grow the company tranche of work, is whether law firms have a role here to help in-house counsel develop their own generative AI strategy as everybody's trying to figure out the next few years together. But as you mentioned, and I'm going to pull a thread from what Jay was discussing about the Cravath model, because the Cravath model and the Christopher Columbus Langdellian model of legal education are closely tied together. And the idea historically was always that law schools would focus on the intellectual development exclusively of their students. And once they joined a firm like Cravath would teach them the practice of law, right? So it was very intentionally divided. And we've seen lots of progress over the last century, the development of clinics in law schools, the development of professionalism programs, legal research and writing. But by and large, the core of legal education really still is drawn from that distinctive divide between thinking like a lawyer and practicing like a lawyer. And I think one of the major shifts that will happen in the years ahead is that law schools, if they want to remain the providers of talent to this changing legal market, will have to be relentlessly connected to the employers that they serve to find out what is happening within those law firms and how they can be developing responsive curricula, skills experience, partnerships potentially with those firms so that while the students are still in school, they're developing skills that will be relevant in the years ahead. And I can't sort of overstate how much of a shift that will be from the way legal curriculum is currently designed and what a challenge that will be. And I think one of the major challenges that I foresee in the legal education landscape is recruiting faculty, particularly in the legal writing and research realm, who are both aware of the shifts in real time through this relentless connection that they have to develop, are able to figure out what that technological shift means for the curriculum already in place at a law school, and then how they develop new curriculum and execute it in a way that's effective at developing the skills that they now think to be the skills that the marketplace desires. And they're doing all of this in a landscape where every firm in the country is going to be competing for that handful of people who have that skill set to upskill their own associates. And they will be trying to persuade that group of people to come to a law school campus where they're not tenured and they're on a contract basis and paid a salary. And so I think this is maybe the biggest challenge for law school deans in the years ahead is the political shift internally in law schools. And to also pull the thread on Jay's discussion about peak load work, that is the training ground for new law firm associates, right? So there are certainly a lot of complexities to be solved at the partnership level, at the bet the company, grow the company work. But experienced lawyers will be able to navigate this landscape, and they'll be able to figure out how they add value. I am very curious as to what happens to the junior associates in law firms. If they are no longer able to train on this peak load work, what will they actually be training on? Because they are not equipped in year one to come out and be advising on either grow the company or bet the company work. But at the same time, the market currently supports their development because corporate counsel currently grudgingly pays for that training. And I think that that is coming to an end. I know it from corporate counsel that I talk to. They are already frustrated. And you're seeing this collide with the post-COVID period where skill development was thwarted because of the environment into which these graduates came into practice. And so I think it's sort of a perfect storm internally for talent development at firms. At the same time, as Jay mentioned, and as Jordan has written about exquisitely, the leverage model is a real revenue generator for firms. So firms want to figure out how to have junior associates add value. To me, the question is, what does that look like, and how can law schools possibly respond? And the last thing I'll say is law firms will have to look way under the hood of each law school's curriculum in a way they never have before, because it will no longer be uniform. And that is that's the flip side of that relentless connection, is what are they actually teaching the people coming to our firm?
Well, so let me go off script a bit, because your question, I think, Jen, is a really, really good one. And frankly, I want to know the answer from three very smart people. And so I'm just going to ask it here. And that is, let's assume that the leverage model kind of goes the way of Jay's prediction, right? The number of associates kind of dwindles, let's say. Let's take that as like kind of discrete prediction. And let's say this happens in the next 10 or 15 years, pick your number. What will a law firm associate work on in 10 or 15 years, right? Jen, and that's kind of your framing, right? But what are they even going to do? Like we know what they do now. We know what they did 20 years ago before, automated or computer assisted document review. What are they going to do in 15 years? Do we have a good answer for that? Jay, do you want to take first crack at that? Let me put you on the spot.
Sure. Okay, so obviously we're in the murky realm of guesswork, because with the change, 10 to 15 years is a really long time. But actually, to answer this question, I would go 10 to 15 years back, because it's not as though the work of a law firm associate has stayed quite stable in that period. Technology has actually added a great deal of drudgery to junior lawyers' plates. And I think the uneven pace of adoption of just basic productivity technology and how people work has even, added more exponential kind of curve to that drudgery. And I think we can take that away. And then, so, my viewpoint, actually, I'm going to say a couple controversial things. Just because I think the leverage model is shifting does not mean that I think there will be fewer lawyers. I think we're going to have more demand for legal work. I think we're going to need more lawyers. I actually think, though, we may need fewer law firms. I think the level of infrastructure, management, talent development, go-to-market that is going to be necessary, the adaptation that's going to be necessary in the next 10 years is going to be very challenging for many management firms. And then the scale they operate at may not be the right size and shape, especially when you consider, the variety of kind of specialty to full service firms that we have. I think we're going to see major sorting in the provider market along practice specialization, along, which kind of part of the value spectrum they serve. I think firms are going to have to do a serious exercise in terms of thinking about what problems do we solve, where do we want to play, how do we win. The other thing I want to say, and I will actually get to a concrete answer, what I want to say is that the way that in-house counsel practice has been actually pretty much been modeled and then I think adapted from the law firm model. Like, many law departments are just law firms that are captive inside a corporation. I think that's going to change. So the practice skills that are necessary to practice in-house and in private settings, I think we're going to see a sharp divergence. And then so I think it's going to depend on the practice setting. I also actually think that the work of research and reading is going to just change drastically, where they will still be reading, they will still be analyzing, they will still be researching. It's just going to look very different, because you can't learn to be a good lawyer without doing those three things and then drafting, right? But even drafting is going to change a lot. I think that lawyers, even junior lawyers, are going to take on more of a role of a creative director, where they're shaping and framing problems and then having actually richer collaboration with clients and with senior lawyers earlier. And so I actually think in 10 to 15 years, we're going to see rapid development of junior lawyers into experts. So I actually have a pretty rosy prognostication. The path to get there will be painful.
I love that. I love that. I was taking some notes there. Attorneys, especially associates as creative directors. Yeah, lots to say there. Lots to say there. Jordan, same question as to Jay, which is, what's an associate going to do in 10 to 15 years?
Yeah, and I think my answer to that question would be, even though I agree with Jay that there will be more lawyers in 10 or 15 years, my answer on that is that there's not going to be associates in 10 or 15 years, or at least not, in no way, shape, or form familiar to what we have understood today and have understood for a long time. And this goes back to something Jen said, right? It's kind of the question you're asking law firms. Look, do you want to make money off your associates, or do you want them to provide value? Because, for the most part, especially in the first few years of practice, they are not really providing value to the client. They're not in a position to do that. I wrote a piece a few years back which was fundamentally blasphemous. I called it the revenue neutral associate. And I said, here's a concept for you. Rather than taking this brand new person fresh out of law school who, let's admit it, doesn't know anything, none of us did when we first arrived in this profession, and say to them, you've got to bill 1,500 or 2,000 or whatever many hours of work that a client will realistically pay for. There's all sorts of different angles from which that's a pretty obscene request. But fundamentally, it's also a terrible way to develop talent. So I said, all right, here's the thought for you. For the first couple of years, don't bill out your associates' work. It's essentially full-time training and learning, and you're going to accelerate their development so that by the end of their second year in the firm, where all of your rival firms have your typical second-year associate who's just starting to come out and say, okay, I think I kind of get this. You've got these super-powered, seriously empowered young lawyers who are moving up. So one of my things, what I'm saying to law firms these days, now that generative AI is probably going to make this happen, whether you like it or not, because a lot of the work that early stage associates would have done, that's getting done either on the client side or out of a machine or whatever. That's not getting to law firms. So, you've got these lawyers anyway. Why not start immediately turning them into partners, or at least turning them into people who could be partners? It does not take and should not take that long to figure out, both from the firm's perspective and the lawyer's perspective, do you want to be here long term? And I think that we have ridiculously extended the partnership track over the years. When I first went into a law firm in 1993, the partnership track was 6 years. It is double that now in most places. And I guarantee you, it's not because associates today take twice as long to learn stuff, right? It's because law firms, for their own purposes, have extended that track. So my take on it is that stop thinking in terms of partner associate. Start thinking in terms of the legal talent at your disposal, the ways in which you can upgrade that to punch as high above your experience weight as you can, to be that to really what is it they say in other professions? Practice to the top of your license. We should be helping lawyers do that at every stage of their career. Now seems like a terrific time to start doing that.
Yeah, I love that. Jen, any thoughts on that? And then I also have a question for you from the audience.
Sure. And I share a passion for Jordan's vision and would love to see that unfold. But I also am aware of the realities of law firm partnership models and year-end distributions, and the inability even with the most well-intentioned leadership in a law firm, to really be thinking down the road in that way, which is how, ideally we would be thinking about it. I think the other pressure right now, and to Jay's earlier point about the Cravath model being under pressure for so long now, we're seeing the poaching of entire practice groups every single morning by one big global firm to another. And the reason for that, I think, is because, I heard somebody describe this to me and it stuck with me, that law firms seem so stable because they've been around for so long. And really, they are so fragile because it's only human beings. And every human being in the entire equation can walk away at any minute with no repercussions and no restrictions on where they can go next. And so as we're seeing the model sort of start to unfold around us, we're seeing, I think, fear-based recruitment of lateral rainmaking partners, because that is the model that we've seen to date to work and the playbook that we know. And that will work, I think, for the short term. But I think, to Jordan and Jay's points, it will be very difficult to get partners who are in an environment looking for that strategy to play out at their firm, to then think in the thoughtful ways Jordan is about how to support the next generation of leaders in a model that is so short-term focused. And the biggest nightmare of any firm chair is to drop in those profits per equity partner rankings in the AmWal. And once they do, then they know that their rainmakers are walking out the door somewhere else. So that has to be priority one if you're talking about the business model. I don't know what the world will look like in 15 years, but what I would love to see is more of an entrepreneurial mindset being taught to new law students, and more awareness being raised at just how terribly the legal system is serving most of society. And if you think about the starting salary bimodal curve of outcoming graduates of law schools, you have public interest jobs that start at $50,000, the top end firm jobs that start at $215,000 a year, and very little in between. And that, I think, reflects society as a whole and the deficit in legal services available to most individuals and small businesses. And I think if we did a better job in law schools and during legal education at both raising that awareness and then teaching students how they can be developing new businesses, and they're the only ones under the regulations that could actually own them and run them, so you have a market there that is waiting for you to impact it, that maybe we would see people have jobs that are more aligned with the reasons they came to law school in the first place, and able to pay down their student debt or just live a financially viable life.
Yeah, I
So,
absolutely love that. And that,
I
yeah,
actually
no,
want
Jay, please.
Yeah, I actually want to add a few words because this is
Yes.
such a compelling exchange. And obviously, I spend my days on law firm strategy with leadership. So I think it's really hard to envision a future law firm when you change one significant aspect of their business model. It is a platform business model. Law firms have to compete on both sides for talent and for clients, and you can't change one without really changing the other. In the free agency era, which I would say Kirkland really lit the rocket fuel on the free agency era, and I think they're about to be unseated for kind of aggressive poaching, because that's the current standard. We have to consider what violence that is doing to the partnership culture. And that is a fundamental aspect of the partnership model. It's not just about the money, and it's not just about the time, right? They are business partners. And we are now seeing partnerships that are so large that the culture is difficult to hold together anyway. And then the frothiness of the lateral market, which has been unbroken for at least 15 years, has created, I think, much more porous walls into that partnership. And the workplace culture is not what it used to be even 40 years ago, even 20 years ago, right? And then so I have to ask a different question. Everyone's always talking about, what if non-lawyers could own law firms, right? I would actually ask, how many lawyers really want to be a part owner of a law firm? I think very few partners actually exhibit a high level of interest in the management of the firm, the governance of the firm. I think that the partial ownership of the firm is only part and parcel of the partnership standing. I think it is a mark of achievement. It's a mark of standing. And those are social and cultural markers that we have put on that position, right? And then so as we rethink the compensation models, the pricing models that go with the delivery of services, the compensation that we paid those people, we really have to actually rethink what partnership means. Now, I'm not saying partnerships are over. Not at all. What I am saying is I think they have to evolve drastically. And I think we do have to apply blue sky thinking to that, and really think about the interconnected nature of what we're talking about, especially because most law firms understand that junior associates are an investment in the future. It's actually corporates that are begrudging about paying for that, or helping to pay for that, investment in the future, right? And then so I think law firms will actually continue to happily take on that investment. But what the size and shape looks like, I think, is also going to depend on the size and shape of the partnership.
And could I add? Oh, I'm sorry.
No. Go ahead.
I just wanted to build on Jay's good points there and just say that as somebody who teaches and works with law students regularly, I don't think generationally they're as interested, I know this, in becoming equity partners in law firms as the people who came before them. And I think that creates actually a real opportunity to embrace this generation of lawyers if we can figure out how to do it well, so that they can do what Jordan's talking about, practice at the highest level of their degree, and do what Jay's talking about, which is focus on the practice, and we'll set aside all the regulatory constraints because they're real and significant and drive everything and are very hard to change. But I think that generation is very different in that respect.
Yeah, and I'll chime in on that too, right? Because the flexibility that we need in terms of the business structures of law firms is particularly acute here, because Jay is exactly right. A lot of lawyers, they don't want to own the firm necessarily, because ownership has responsibility, right? You got to do stuff. You got to show up and read all the reports and make decisions about that stuff. And yeah, what do most partners want? They want to share the profits, and they want the little status that comes with a little gold P on their card. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but that's fundamentally the way that most lawyers who are partners in their firms consider the value proposition. So if you had, for instance, a commercial or corporate structure where you had shares, you could have common shares and voting shares, right? And some of them have, common shares, you get a piece of the pie at the end of the year, or however often during the year you want it. Okay, that's great. Voting share, that's a different story. So it's just that kind of imagination that to bring forward to this idea is exactly what we need. Because yeah, the partnership model is changing. So many ways in which the law firms are struggling with this right now. I literally just today wrote a piece in my Substack about cohesion in law firms and why so many firms seem to be struggling with this right now. And the essential advice I had was, listen, you got to go back to your core values. And part of me was sort of thinking, yeah, okay, the core values of a lot of firms are, profit per equity partner and nothing beyond that. But again, this is going to be the crucible to which law firms are going to go. Do you have a viable business with inherent value here, or are you just a hotel for lawyers that's interested in maximizing profit? I think most firms know which they are. I just think the smart money's on the first kind in the long run.
So keep those questions coming in the chat, folks. I'm going to get to them, but I want to capitalize on this momentum here and stay on this topic because it's fascinating. And Jordan, I want to stick with you. Mm-hmm. We've talked about, obviously, these changes of leverage model, ownership model, meaning of partnership, meaning of being an associate, the economic model. So who are going to be the winners and losers here, right? I mean, can some law firms, let's say they adopt your, stock structure, or adopt, the structure that Jen advanced, or adopt the structure that Jay advanced? Might they be winners? If that's the case, who are the losers? And I don't think we've talked about it much today, but might there be, big four competitors, other legal services, consultancies that come in and really, because of the way they're structured, hit it out of the park, where law firms are at best hitting singles and doubles?
Yeah. In terms of those kind of changes to the structure of how law firms are set up, that will probably happen in 100 years, or it'll happen in 50 years, or it can happen in 2 years. What's going to bring that about is going to be massive external change, and no one has any idea when that's going to arrive. So, but I wouldn't be holding my breath for it. I think that there are some law firms that will continue to be winners for a time. at a certain point, when I think you get into, I don't know at what point in the AmLaw list you get to it. I don't know if it's 50 or 35 or 20, what have you. At a certain point, and I'm speaking unusually bluntly here, at a certain point, quality and outcome doesn't really matter that much, because what you're buying is the brand, and what you're buying is the name, and these names are platinum, and deservedly so. They do good work, right? But past a certain point, no one's really looking under the hood all that much. So I think these firms are, for the most part, probably in still really good condition. As for the rest, who knows, right? Nobody can predict winners or losers from day to day. I will say this about the big four. They've been the monster in the basement, right, for the legal profession for what, 20, 30 years at least, certainly since the whole multidisciplinary practice fiasco in the late 90s. And as far as, again, from my perspective, I've kind of stopped waiting for Godot on this one. I'm thinking, you know what? They sell legal services to their clients. They seem perfectly content to do that. They keep saying they're not interested in replacing the big law firms. I'm inclined to start taking them at their word on this, because you know what? If they wanted to, if they really said, we want to go and dominate this market for legal services, they got the money to do it. They have the money to finance whatever they want, to buy whatever they need, to lobby whatever legislative or judicial or other processes are required to do that. I don't think they're that interested in it at this point. And, I've been inside a couple of big four firms. I'm sure all of us have at a certain point. And it's not as if they're, magical, super efficient machines, with no, they got a lot of the same problems. They're as messed up as law firms are in a lot of ways, right? So, we're kind of all in the same, if not the same boat, we're certainly on the same ocean. So I think we're all of us are trying to figure out what the next direction is.
Jay, winners and losers?
Yeah, I have some specific thoughts on this, and I would be willing to go on record. So I published those power rankings for the American Lawyer the last couple years. My hypothesis is that there's only about 300 law firms of consequence operating globally, and by consequence I mean that they do sizable important work for corporate clients, and by firms I mean firms that are stable entities, because there are a lot of like small shops that do not outlive the interests of the name partners, right? It's an arrangement of convenience, a lifestyle business for people, lawyers who want to practice together. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about firms that are interested in building durable brands based on quality, based on expertise. And it's not a big group, even though it's a fragmented market, it's not a big group. I think there's about 25 to 30 firms that are, sitting pretty for the near future, and you can see who they are because I rank them in the power rankings. I think a lot of firms that are middling in size, middling in specialization, middling in footprint are in trouble. I think that new winners are going to emerge that we don't know about yet. And one of the predictions I did make in the American Lawyer is the rise of the bionic boutique. I think hyper specialists, especially in litigation, with partners who are very interested in technology enablement, not to make things cheaper, but to be faster and better, get to insights faster on high consequence matters. There is going to be a material, appreciable difference in quality of outcomes from those teams. And so I think we will see those boutiques rise. I think that the firms that have invested early and aggressively and intentionally in the industrialization of very high-end work, I'll name two, Kirkland and Latham, are clearly doing that. Their profits are not what's interesting to me. Their size is not what's interesting to me. I think they are really trying to figure out what it looks like when you actually take an organization and you try to industrialize knowledge work at scale. I think there are a few other firms who are really thinking, smartly about that. I think some of the winners that we may not know about yet are alternative legal service providers, which is what we call them now, but new law providers that are multidisciplinary. I think the firms that invest heavily in, experienced legal practitioners, so lawyers that have significant experience in the practice, who also have, in tandem other expertise in legal technology. I think that's going to be super important. If those entities actually invest very heavily in generative AI and get ahead of the ball, I think there's no telling where they're going to play, but I would also guess that those kinds of service providers might provide better training grounds for inside counsel in future than maybe the firms that are going to take a hard turn to that cream work that most firms are chasing, but what Cravath was designed to do. So I think we're going to see a bifurcation. First of all, inside outside, and that I think I would bet heavily on new entrants. I think now is the time for new business models, new training models, new revenue models.
I love that. Jen, any thoughts on winners and losers in the greater market, also in legal education as well?
Yeah, I think in both spaces, I would say everything that's happening in law firms is reflected and maybe amplified on law school campuses. And I think that I could envision a future where we see some really interesting winners emerge. And I agree with Jay about the alternative legal service providers, but just focusing on the existing firms and existing schools, I think there are real benefits right now to some of the firms that are more mid-sized, that have more cohesion. Jordan and Jay both talked about the massive sprawl of law firm partnerships and the challenges with cultural cohesion. I think smaller firms, the partners know one another. They are committed in a deeper way to the endeavor of the firm, and in well-run firms, I think you'll see a lot of differentiation there. And I know all of us talk to law firm partners at firms like this, and you could tell the difference between firms that have a really, really strong culture and firms that aren't thinking about these things at all. And so I think that the other advantage those firms have is, if you think about the huge clients that Kirkland and Latham and others like them serve, I think their legal departments will be pressured much more quickly and much more thoroughly by the larger enterprise they serve to reduce costs and integrate generative AI into their legal services. And that will be felt by their corporate law firms. But I think that the smaller corporate clients that maybe have 1, 2, 3 lawyers in their corporate counsel's office and are served by a more regional sized firm, those partners have more of an ability to stay closely connected, to help really understand what the business challenges are and to respond to them in the way that Jordan's talking about, the grow the company work, and maybe even opportunities to recruit associates and develop them the right way, the way that Jordan's referencing. And they could differentiate themselves in a hiring market where on the law school side, I think you'll see some law schools that are formerly under the radar emerge as leaders here, because they have spent the next few years really developing a curriculum and an approach to modern lawyer formation that both aligns their students' goals with the opportunities that they create for them and develops relationships with firms that maybe are not in the AmLaw 20, but offer a better, I don't want to say work-life balance because I hate that expression, but just a better life for a practicing lawyer, to a generation that is very open to that concept and looking for it.
Jen, I want to pop in really fast, if I can, just on one point you made there,
Please, Jordan, yeah.
which I think is really important. When you're talking about the distinction between firms that are going to be successful and aren't, and boy, so much of it comes down to something which I think you said without saying, which is leadership. And I think that is absolutely going to be, if there's going to be one differentiator between the firms that move forward and the firms that don't, it's going to be the quality of the leadership. And I don't even mean, leadership that is, visionary or whatever. I mean, that's nice if you can have it. But honestly, and I've written about this elsewhere, the defining characteristic of leadership these days is just, it's courage, for lack of a better term. It's being able to speak truth to power, and the power in your law firm is a lot of those very important partners, and the truth is what they don't want to hear, but they need to. And I think if you're able to execute on that as a leader, I think your firm is going to have massive benefits as a result of that.
100% agree. And I would just add empathetic leadership too, and really understanding what motivates the people in your organization. I know that we have a question coming up about lateral recruitment of associates. I mean, I think something that Adam Grant at Wharton advocates are stay interviews instead of exit interviews when somebody's already walking out the door. Ask your superstar performers that you want to keep, why do you stay at this firm when we know you're probably getting headhunted by every competitor that we have? Take that information and fold it into your strategic planning and leadership development, and make sure you're doing more of it and less of the things that you're hearing in your exit interviews. But I 100% agree on the leadership point.
Yeah, and Jen, I think you're referring to Stephanie Gudas's really good question, which is, I think it's a question that is thematically relevant to all types of training and specialization, and that is, how do you prevent associates from being trained for 1 to 2 years, then lateraling to another firm and company? And I love that response to that question. Jordan, I want to turn this back to you, and I want to give you the kind of following context. So in the 70s and 80s, electronic spreadsheets were becoming more and more popular, right? I think more in the 80s, later called Excel, among other products. And based on what I've read, the accounting lobby was none too thrilled about this, and they even tried to limit who could hold licenses to Excel type tools, and they tried to make it so that only accountants can hold those licenses, right? I think for a very reasonable cause. And their argument, of course, as a trade group was, well, the number of accountants is going to go down, and you're going to have all of these, crazy non-accountants using all of these, these whiz-bang tools, and you're going to have all kinds of fraud and sloppiness, et cetera, et cetera. The second prediction seemed to not happen, and the first prediction seemed to, be totally wrong, because there were more accountants year over year in every single year through the 80s and 90s and thousands and tens and now into the 2020s, right? And one of the ways that happened is that accounting went, and I don't mean this in a pejorative way, but down market, right? I mean, you have H&R Block, where before you only had accountants representing big companies, maybe regional companies, high net worth folks, where now you have accountants representing small businesses, bodegas, restaurants, food trucks. Mm-hmm. Do you think that's a apt corollary for law? Does that miss something? Is that where the future of law might be going, or are there other things at play here?
So much of that rides, of course, on the regulation of legal services. Now, here in Canada, legal services regulation is dominated by practicing lawyers. There in the US, it is the authority resides with courts and judges, and who have, for the most part, delegated a lot of the day-to-day work to state bars, but retain a lot of the decision-making power themselves. And there is no way in which you would look at any other industry and say, an industry regulated by the people who are the primary providers of services in that industry doesn't in no way serve the public interest. So this is a door I've been pounding on for many years now, and I will continue to do so. The reformation, the liberalization, the rethinking, at the very least, of rules around the regulation of legal services, long overdue. And I could, and I won't talk today about this, but I'll just give you the one line which I frequently find myself saying to regulators. I said, look, we have studies from virtually every common law jurisdiction in the world. I'm sure it's no different in other jurisdictions as well, that show that in the range of maybe 15 to 20% of the entire population of legal issues and problems and situations and scenarios ever find their way to a lawyer, right? And of course, many fewer ever get in front of a judge. That's fine. But the vast majority, 80-85% of legal issues problems, they don't encounter the legal system with any kind of assistance, any kind of, on many of them, a good 40% don't go there at all. And what I say to them is this: look, lawyers serve 15-20% of the market. You know what? That's fine. Good for you. You worked hard. You're very smart. You do all these things. You're entitled to whatever part of the market you want. Fill your boots, as we say out east. But why in the world are you saying to the other 80-85% of the market, and you get nothing? You don't get anybody to serve you. And if anybody who's not one of us tries to serve you, we will prosecute them and put them out of business. I said, you listen, either serve everybody, universal access to justice, which I'm pretty sure is somewhere in an ethical code somewhere, or if you're not going to do it, step aside, let somebody else who will give it a shot.
Jay, thoughts?
So on the regulation point, I mean, I agree with Jordan. Obviously, self-regulation has a lot of issues. We're seeing a lot of that play out in the UPL disputes. But, let me add a different kind of angle to the conversation. So I'll go back further than you in history and talk about William Stanley Jevons, who wrote a paper because he was worried that the earlier industrial revolution was going to cause the depletion of coal. And it was his actual observation that increases in efficiency in the production and consumption of goods actually causes an increase in demand. And then so I think that's what we saw play out with accounting. I think Jevons was right about coal. Turns out he was right about cloud computing, about aviation, and about a whole host of other things. And I think what that tells us is that often resources are finite, human desires are infinite, and then so I think that we can count on increase in demand for legal services, noting that people and society and corporations actually remain underserved by lawyers, right? And then so I think the business opportunity, the economic opportunity, and the technological capability are there. And I think the economic forces are going to be inexorable. So we are going to see some shift, some change, but I don't know how that's going to hit against the regulatory wall. I do know, though, the market demand will be there. And then the venture capitalists, I think, are going to finance some people who want to take a run at it. And then so I think we're in for a thrilling time.
Yeah, Jen, I want to bring you in on this one because, very frequently you read about how America is a very litigious country. And if you actually look at the statistics, it's litigious among the most sophisticated, the most educated, and, the upper middle class and higher. It's very not litigious if you're a poor person in this country, or if you're an uneducated person in this country, or if you don't know people who are in the legal system. It's highly unlitigious, and you could say unjustly so, in the sense that poor and underprivileged people are kind of leaving claims on the table, right? Out of just simply not knowing. Do you think any of the impacts of generative AI on the legal industry are going to affect that at all? Like, if you take what Jordan said and you kind of lift the regulatory piece, which is not minor, but let's say that is loosened up in some way. Do you think that the great beneficiary of a lot of this change and a lot of the technical advancement will be Main Street, right? Your average middle class or lower middle class person in this country? Or am I being too rose-colored glasses and pie in the sky here?
I think it's a great question. And you're talking about two totally different worlds when you lift the regulatory structure or when it exists now. Because if we keep it the way it is now, I don't share your rose-colored glasses. But I think if we lived in a world where we had a different regulatory structure and we were teaching entrepreneurial mindset and we were raising awareness of these issues and we were sending bright young lawyers out to solve them, equipped with interdisciplinary education. This is a bit of a pivot from what you're talking about, Anand, but I've been listening to this podcast called Business Wars on Wondery, and it's like every season follows the clash of two titans in an industry, Marriott versus Hilton, or Amazon versus Target, or any of these big companies that we know, and they make these pivots all the time based on the economy, based on changing consumer preferences, based on new opportunities they see. I think one of the biggest challenges that we have in our industry is that we are so siloed from other influences because of our regulatory structure and the resulting partnership that creates in law firms, that we're not even exposed to new ideas or different concepts of how we might grow the pie of demand versus trying to cling desperately to the existing piece that everybody's squabbling over. And to everybody's point, I mean, Jordan said the statistics, we are serving virtually nobody, both the underserved and low-income Americans, but also everybody else. And there are huge opportunities to do good and to do well if we change the regulations and if we actually raise awareness among both the consumers and the new lawyers. I think that would give me hope, but that's a lot of things to accomplish.
Yeah, agreed. All right. I'm going to take a page out of Ed Walter's book here and go around the horn with final thoughts. Jordan, I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you first, what are your kind of high level takeaways here? I mean, we've talked about, and this has been a broad ranging conversation from law firm value props, Cravath model, kind of potential disintegration of the leverage model, kind of deep economics of units of work. There was something that we didn't get to, and this is a quote from Jay. Jay might have been quoting someone else. AI displaces tasks, not people. But there's this big kind of constellation of topics here. What's your high level takeaway if you had to give the audience, a minute or two, to take away from this particular panel? what might it be, Jordan?
No pressure.
No
Okay,
pressure,
so
no pressure.
this session, this entire day has been about generative AI, and there's
Yeah.
no question. I've never seen anything like generative AI come down the pipe in the legal sector. And law is particularly vulnerable in ways other professions are, in ways most trades are not. Other professions are not. Generative AI is a knowledge and language machine, and we are a knowledge and language profession in a knowledge and language business in so many ways. So our vulnerability is acute in this area. So yes, it is going to be a significant catalyst to change in, among other things, the business model of law firms. But it's only going to be a catalyst in the sense that the changes have been long overdue. We have been sitting for ages with these outdated models and obsolete approaches and archaic ideas about how to run businesses. The idea that we have partnerships for $100 million, billion-dollar businesses is loopy, and that the CEO of these billion-dollar businesses can only do it part-time because they still have to keep billing work for their clients not just to keep busy, but so that their own partners will respect them, right? That's nuts. And the only reason we don't realize it's nuts is that we're used to it, we're accustomed to it, we grew up with it. So my hope is that generative AI, not that it's the be all and the end all, but it's the first. It's the first catalyst that's really going to kick a significant reappraisal and reinvention, reconfiguration of how we set up the businesses of legal services. Because there, as Jay has said, and as Jen has echoed across the board, there are so many ways in which we could be doing this better than we are right now. It is way past time we actually started doing that.
Yeah, I love that. Jay, thoughts and takeaways?
Yeah, I'll expand on the quote that we didn't get to. AI displaces tasks, not jobs, and not people. And I think that that's meant to be reassuring and challenging at the same time. In fact, if it did displace jobs, management would be easy because you just cut the jobs and you lift and shift the work, right? But it doesn't work like that. And so the implication is that there is a window of opportunity, but yes, pressure where we have to redesign the job. We have to redesign the jobs. And that is not a challenge that can be solved in a closed, door room. I think it's going to require a lot of learning by institutions that are very successful, whether it's law firms, whether it's law schools, institutions that are over 100 years old, highly pedigreed, highly branded, and they are going to have to bring a learning posture to that exercise to really understand the art of the possible. And that art of the possible is going to be changing very quickly as the state of the art continues to advance. And one other takeaway that I would triple underline for the whole audience, one voice that cannot be missing from law firm strategic planning exercises, innovation exercises, is the voice of the client. I know that law firms are actually really, really trying to learn about what's possible with AI. I know a lot of teams are out in the market looking at the tools, learning about the technology. But I really encourage management committees, executive committees, managing partners to pick up the phone and call your 10 biggest clients and hear directly from them what they are thinking, what they are expecting, what they are hoping for, what they're anxious about, because that dialogue is actually what's going to safeguard your future.
I appreciate that, Jay. Jen, bring us on home. Thoughts and takeaways.
So I just want to echo something that came up earlier. I think Jordan or Jay or both mentioned fear. And I think that the thing that will doom us are fear and ignorance. If we, try to continue to compete for the world that exists today and cling to it with everything we have, that's how we lose out. Not only from a business standpoint, but psychologically, research shows that when we are fear driven, we can only see what's right in front of us. And as Jay said, the art of the possible is ignored as a result. So I think courage is required, constant education. And somebody asked in the questions about a curriculum on skills that are constantly changing. I think teaching law students metacognition and how we learn well and how we self-educate this moment is so cool, I think, because I think the barrier to entry for becoming expert in all of this will never be lower. On the flip side, the ability to ignore it in the short term will never be more available to us. And so it's incumbent upon each of us to educate ourselves. It's fairly easy to do if we open our eyes and are taking in more information. And I think that the firms, the schools that are led in courage and human centricity and empathy will be the ones that emerge stronger on the other side.
Absolutely love that. Absolutely love that. Wow, that was quite a discussion. That was a jam-packed 1 hour, almost on the dot. Jen, Jordan, Jay, really, really appreciate the discussion. I know our audience enjoyed it as well. I am going to wrap this conference here in this room here. No need to go to the chairperson's closing remarks. This is as good a place as any. So, couple housekeeping notes, a couple big takeaways in my mind from this conference, and I will wrap this up in just 3 minutes or so. Number one, I just wanted to announce a follow-up to today's event. It's called the Legal AI Pathfinders Assembly. It's going to be in New York, in person, not air meet, in person, December 7th. Kevin is going to post on that, and you could click on that and learn more about it. The event's going to be peer-to-peer. It's going to be a deeper dive on how law firms are implementing AI and designing their own AI playbooks. So it's going to be kind of a zoomed-in version of one aspect of this conference. Just wanted to wrap up the day with some high-level takeaways. Obviously, looming above this entire conference today was Danielle Benecke's keynote, and that was, what is the AI-enabled lawyer look like? We went from there to talking about, the death of the billable hour, or maybe the rise of strategic pricing. Why talk about the death of the billable hour? We've been talking about it for decades. Maybe not going to happen, but is strategic pricing, maybe discounts for speed and volume, which reduces the costs of goods sold, the more, reasonable way to discuss this? Speaking of costs of goods sold, obviously production costs are plummeting, and there are a lot of implications here. More access to attorneys, which we covered today, especially in simple rote cases, may be one of the most immediate implications, and the market impacts on that are potentially highly dramatic in all of our lifetimes. We heard from the AI task force at Troutman Pepper that brought together a number of varied personas and roles in order to get buy-in on major tech initiatives. I think that their organizational lessons were very well received based on all the comments that we saw here today. I really like the two practical demos that we saw, Office and Dragons and DraftWise. I was a litigator, but I know the pain that transactional attorneys face when it comes to deal documents, revising deals, catching typos, drowning in documents. Office and Dragons and DraftWise provided us with real-world examples of how they've used GPT and LLMs in the last 9-10 months to make progress in how those attorneys do work. Jason Barnwell had a really great, contribution to his panel. One of the takeaways that I took notes on when he was talking was that buy-side / in-house corporate departments can integrate legal tech through their law firms, and often that's the quickest way to improve the value chain on their ends. You can't go directly through Microsoft, go through one of their law firms. I thought that was very, very clever. Obviously, we just heard from this great group here. Jay, I wrote down your law firm associates as creative directors. I really like that framing, and I think a lot of what we said here today kind of was a great capstone, both on law firm economics, the lawyers of the future, legal education, and all of those points. So I want to wrap the day here by providing a big thanks to our two sponsors here, DraftWise and Office and Dragons. I want to thank all of our speakers and our moderators over the course of the day. I want to thank our keynote speaker, Danielle Benecke. And then I also want to thank the two people behind the curtain who we didn't see today, Kevin Klein and Daniel Smallwood at Inside Practice, for organizing this great conference. Let's wrap here. Have a great rest of your day, and I'm hoping to see all of you soon. Take care, all.